Chapter 3. Taryn. The early morning sunlight leaked in through the window brightly as Taryn opened his eyes. He was too tired to start his early morning chores before going to set up shop. He couldn't sleep during the night. He had too much on his mind. His restless mind seemed to only think of Marissa. It bothered him that Marissa was betrothed to another man and had to move to another kingdom. Taryn couldn't stand that he wouldn't be able to see Marissa anymore, or be able to talk to her, or even be able to have long walks through the woods with her anymore. Natalia would be there for him, and he there for her, but it just wouldn't be the same. Marissa was so much sweeter and understanding, and just so much more beautiful. He stayed up all night thinking about her long red hair and crystal blue eyes, and the way she would smile at him. He would miss those things and didn't even realize it until she was almost gone. She was 16 now, and a woman, and a very beautiful and caring one at that. Even though Marissa and Taryn were just friends, he still cared deeply for her, more than what a friend usually would care. He loved her. He knew this because of the way he felt when they were together, and the way his heart pounded so rapidly when she touched him. He loved the way she smiled and blushed when she did something silly. He loved that she didn't even know how beautiful she was, and that she didn't let her social stature get to her head. He loved her long red hair and the way it fluttered in the breeze when they went for walks. Most of all, he loved that she wasn't even embarrassed by him being poor. He just loved her, and she didn't even know it. "Taryn, honey, are you up yet? I made some tea and tartlets," Morrill hollered from the kitchen. Taryn slept in the upstairs compartment, which only had one way in and out, up a ladder and through a hatch door. He could hear his mother rummaging through cabinets and the sound of pots and dishware crashing together. "Yes, Mother," Taryn replied as he continued to just lay there on his homemade stuffed goose feathered mattress beneath his knitted quilts. Even though he was 18 and considered a man, he still chose to live at home and take care of his mother. He didn't feel comfortable with the thought of her living alone in the woods. He knew she would never move out. His father's spirit seemed to live in the walls and the grounds of that little cottage. It wasn't just a house, it was a home that symbolized his father and would stand forever. "Come on down, Taryn, before the tea gets cold," she hollered. He heard another crash of dishes, as if she dropped a pot or two. He knew that he wouldn't be able to sleep anymore, so he got up to pull on his trousers and tunic. Taryn could see through his small window that it looked like it was going to be a beautiful day. But under the circumstances, he knew that that day wasn't going to be as beautiful as it should have been. The sun illuminated through the treetops, marking shadows of the leaves on the grass. The leaves of the trees danced in the breeze, and the dragonflies and butterflies fluttered to and fro about them. Little birds dove in and out of the tall grass that waved back and forth. Taryn loved mornings like that in the forest, wishing it could look like that every day. But even as the cheery sunlight touched his face, he still felt sad inside, as if his heart was slowly losing something. He knew his heart wouldn't be the same after the day was over with. "Coming, Mother," he hollered back as he fastened the front of his trousers. He looked into a small mirror that hung on the wall of his little attic-like room. He ran his hands through his shaggy black hair to try to comb it a little. He was a handsome young man with black hair and blue eyes. His teeth were not too bad, and his bone structure in his face was nice to look at. At least that's what his mother told him, and that it resembled his father greatly. As he looked into the mirror, he wondered why Marissa didn't love him the way he loved her. But he knew it was of no use to love a princess as beautiful as she. Society and rules would never allow it. The firstborn daughter of the king was always betrothed to a prince from another country, and if the king had a son, he would be the first in line to take the kingdom, and a princess would be set up to come to him on her 16th birthday, like sweet Marissa. That was the way they did things, and had been doing for generations. That was how different kings from different lands negotiated, making sure they had stability and a partner kingdom to trade goods with. Taran didn't like it and thought it unfair. He smiled in the mirror to check out his teeth. He knew he had to clean them as soon as he went outside to freshen up at the washing bowl. Today was the day that he knew he had to look his best for Marissa. He wanted her to remember him as a strapping young poor boy instead of just a poor boy. He fastened the top of his tunic and then slipped on his heavy boots. A large dagger and a heart-shaped stone necklace that he had made especially for Marissa hung on the wall of his little room. The dagger was his father's, and a beautiful one at that. The hilt was made of a smoothed-out black stone that his father had found far off in the mountains before Taran was born. The blade was sharp, and Taran made sure he kept it that way. He took the dagger from the wall and put the silver sheath on it, which was also beautiful and embedded with smaller black stones. There was a thick leather strap that was attached to the sheath, which he had fastened around his waist. The dagger was one of his favorite things in the whole world, besides the blue stone necklace that he had made himself. He put the necklace around his neck, tucking the blue heart-shaped stone underneath his tunic. When he was a child, exploring the far-off land of Minselthraed with his father, he found a blue stone that was wedged in the rough base of a cliff. He saved it all that time just because it was the first special thing he had found with his father, and not to mention it was lovely to look at. One side was rough, with the tiny light blue crystals all over it, and the other side was a darker blue that was not as rough. He spent a lot of time chiseling at it and forming it into the shape of a heart. He fastened a long thin strip of leather around it, making it into a necklace. He made it especially for that day, Marissa's 16th birthday. Taran had told Marissa the story of how he came about the blue crystal once. She loved the story, and he knew that she would think the gift was even more special just because of it. Opening the small hatch door of Taran's room was like opening a door to an oven, but just not as hot. The smell of the sweet tartlets and freshly steeped tea rushed into his room, hitting his nose like how the taste of sweet honey would on his taste buds. "Good morning. It smells wonderful, Mother," Taran exclaimed as he made his way down the ladder from his loft. "Good morning, son. I made some fresh berry tartlets, and there is some tea ready for you at the table," Morrill said, taking a batch of the berry tartlets out of the stone oven. Taran sat down at the small wooden table that was in the center of his small cozy home. Even though their house was small, it was a very lovely looking house. Bouquets of pansies and roses sat here and there, and small clay vases of dried herbs and flower petals filled the room with lovely smells. Bundles of dried herbs hung upside down from the ceiling, giving the small home an earthy and pleasant feeling. A small window on each wall allowed the bright sunlight to pour in, and candles sat here and there for light during the dark nights. One side of their house was the kitchen area, with a small stone fireplace oven that was built into the wall and a washing basin for the dishes. And the other side of the house was Morrill's small room, which was closed off with an embellished quilt hanging from the ceiling. The quilt was a magnificent piece of art, which had a scene of a castle with a prosperous land surrounding it. Taran and Morrill were very talented and made many things, not only to sell in their shop, but for their own home as well. Taran created things which he used from nature, and Morrill created things by sewing and embroidering, as well as creating different remedies, elixirs, and concoctions which always did good things for their minds and bodies. Morrill also made their clothes, curtains, blankets, and just about everything else that dealt with fabrics. Taran sipped at his tea, sniffing the light scent of coriander and lavender and other herbs as wisps of steam rolled out. He began to think of Marissa. Coriander and lavender tea was her favorite. She would sometimes come over to have tea with them, and to eat whatever his mother made that day, which was usually something sweet. He loved every moment he had with Marissa and didn't want it to ever end, but he knew that day was the last day that he would ever see her beautiful smile ever again. "Here we are," Moral said as she placed the covered basket of tartlets on the table. She sat on the bench across from her son. Taryn said nothing as he still sat in a daze, lost in deep thought. Moral moved the vase of the flowers that was sitting in the center of the table over to the side so that she could see her son better. She noticed how sad and off he looked, and she knew why, but didn't want to bring it up. She was waiting for him to. Instead, she uncovered the basket of tartlets. Steam rose from the basket, whirling up into the air, releasing the aroma of sweet berries and buttery pie crust. Moral served them both, placing 2 tartlets on each plate. The little topless pies looked delicious as the thick juices from the berries oozed over the sides of the crust. Taryn brought one of them to his mouth, then put it back onto his plate. "Mother, can I ask you something?" Taryn asked, looking into his mother's eyes. She was in the middle of fixing up her tea with some fresh cream and sugar, but stopped, looking up at him. "Yes, son?" "How?" He paused, looking down at his tartlets. He knew the question he was about to ask might not be such a favorable one. "How does your heart heal after losing someone whom you are in love with?" Taryn watched his mother's eyes. He knew it took his mother a long time to get over his father's death. He always wondered how her heart felt because they never really talked about it. Moral was quiet for a second or two, and then took a sip of her tea. "Well, son, you continue to live your life every day and think of other things in your life that is worth waking up in the mornings for. And you talk to the good Lord and ask Him to mend your broken heart. And everything happens for a reason, you know. You just have to ask God what that reason is, and then you meet Him halfway to figure it out, and you thank Him for it. You must always thank God. Loving God and trusting Him with your whole heart is the only thing that matters." Taryn just nodded his head. He briefly thought about what his mother said, and the comment that what happened was supposed to happen. He didn't like that part too much. He knew that even though he loved Marissa with all of his heart, he was not allowed to. He wasn't allowed to be with her, for that matter. He knew that Marissa probably didn't feel the same way for him as he did for her. How could a princess even grow to love a commoner? But even if she were to love him the same way, it didn't really matter. The only thing that mattered was what was about to happen, what was supposed to happen. And the important thing was that Marissa was destined to be the queen of a whole other country, far, far away. "Taryn, I know how you feel about the Princess Royal, but Her Highness has to be married to that prince, and she has to live in that other kingdom. She has had no choice ever since she was born. Living a royal life seems charming and wonderful, but when it comes down to it, it's a life filled with rules and regulations. Living that life comes with specific obligations." "I know that. I just don't think it should be this way. I don't want her to leave, but I know she has to." Taryn took another bite of his tartlet and then drank the rest of his tea. "And you were right, Mother. I just need to live my life, which reminds me I need to get going to open up shop," Taryn said, then stood up, cramming his other tartlet into his mouth, not caring when the hot juices from the berries burned him. "But it's early still. Sit down and have another tartlet, son," Moral said as she wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. "No, I want to wash up, then get started early. The weather is beautiful, which means people will want to start their shopping early." Taryn kissed his mother on her cheek and then walked to the door. "All right, son, I will see you in a little while then," she said as she brought her cup of tea to her lips. That was usually what they did. Taryn would open up shop in the morning and Moral would come later to help with business. Then they would close in the early evening before it got dark. But Taryn thought that he might close a little earlier that day, just so that he could spend quality time with Marissa before she had to get ready for her big social event that night. Taryn walked out, shutting the door behind him. He really didn't need to leave early, and he really didn't care that the customers wanted to shop early. He just wanted to leave. He didn't want to talk to his mother anymore about Marissa leaving. He shouldn't even have brought it up, he thought. He knew one thing, that he didn't care if Marissa was a princess or not. He was going to tell her how he had been feeling about her since the very first time he met her 4 years ago. He had to let her know how he felt about her. Even though his heart would be broken, it would make him feel better that she knew. Taryn walked over to the side of the cottage to where the water well was. He pulled up a bucket of fresh, cold water and poured it into a large bowl. He sat the bowl on top of a small table that sat next to the back wall of the house. He washed his face with a bar of lavender soap his mother had made and washed his mouth and teeth with mint, rosemary, and caraway seed paste, which was contained in a small covered glass jar. The paste was strong and refreshing, smelling of sweet spearmint and evergreen. After freshening up, he walked through the beautiful sunlit forest and thought some more. He decided to go the long way, through the forest to the marketplace. The leaves and grass of the forest fluttered in the soft breezes, allowing the sunlight to sparkle through the thick overhang. The feathery wind felt wonderful against his skin. He loved when the leaves would scatter on the earth when the breezes burst through the timber. He also loved the sounds of the trees and critters that were scattered throughout the serene atmosphere. The forest's animal companions always darted through the bushes and tall grasses, every once in a while poking their furry faces out. The forest province was one of the most beautiful parts of Minselthwaite. Taryn thought of Marissa once again and remembered how he saw her strolling through the forest by herself for the first time. That was the first time that he had ever seen a royal walk through the forest without a companion, servant, or guard following close behind. He always saw the random lovers, travelers, or even children of the kingdom, but never Princess Marissa. He remembered how that day was an extraordinarily beautiful day, and how after an exhilarating and swift year of knowing Marissa, it was the first time that she had ever come into the forest province, looking for him. He would never forget it. He remembered it in detail as if it had just happened. His mind drifted away to that sweet moment. Taryn walked through the forest, coming from the great rosemary bush he had planted many years ago with his father when he was but a small child. He remembered how his father came home one morning after a long journey with his guild from the great trade fair. He brought home many things, and rosemary was one of them. He and his father had planted it in an opened area in the forest, along the steep side of a very small cliff and away from the shade, in full sunlight. Taryn contained sprigs of the aromatic herb in a leather satchel that hung over his shoulder. Morrill had asked him to get as many as he could, the tips of the rosemary that had the most blooms. Not only did she use the scented gray-green leaves in the home remedies, but kept a vessel of them around the cottage to chase away any bad smell. As Taryn made his way to his home, he could hear a beautiful voice. It was the voice of a young maiden singing a piece of music that he had heard before many times. He had usually heard the catchy melody from the bard that would come and entertain in the town square and the marketplace. He had also remembered hearing Marissa and Natalia singing it together once before, harmonizing beautifully. The maiden's voice traveled softly through the forest, dancing in the breezes. "Are you going to the springtime fair, Rosemary, love and sunshine? Remember me when you go there, for he once was a hero of mine. Tell him to make me a golden crown, Rosemary, love and sunshine, without no metal and made with feather down, then he'll be a true love of mine." Her voice was beautiful and soft and hypnotizing, sounding like a forest nymph from ancient stories. Taryn followed it, catching a glimpse of the songstress. At first glance, he knew who the girl was. Her red hair and lovely countenance gave it away. His heart began to pound, excited and surprised to see her in the forest province, his abode. He quickly began to finger-comb his black hair and smooth out his old tunic. He tried to rub the dirt from his hands and trousers, but knew it would be of no use without his mother's herbal cleansing soap. He dashed up a small slope and hid behind a large oak tree, apparently catching Marissa's attention. He grunted at himself. He was irritated, knowing that Marissa must have caught a glimpse of him. She had to have, because she stopped singing for a moment and then giggled. Taryn could feel his face turning bright red with embarrassment as he leaned up against a tree. He held his breath, then peeked around the tree to see what she was doing. She started singing it again as she made her way through some tall grass and flowers, picking a bouquet as she slowly came closer. He went to walk out from behind the massive oak, but hesitated. He knew he should have made himself present, but he didn't want her to stop singing. He rarely heard her beautiful singing voice. She usually would only sing for royalty or nobility at concerts that would be held in the castle or on a random occasion. Hearing her angelic voice amongst the enchanted forest was like magic. He fell in love with her all over again. Tell him to find me a castle of lace, rosemary, love and sunshine, by the salt water on a mountain's face. Then he'll be a true lover of mine. Tell him to clean it with a fine feather, rosemary, love and sunshine, and sprinkle the halls with sprigs of heather. Then he'll be a true hero of mine. Taryn began to come out from behind the tree, worried that Marissa would realize that he'd been watching her. She continued to sing, passing the tree a couple of yards away. Taryn went to take a step, still fixated on Marissa. His foot got caught on a large knotted root of the oak, making him fall towards the ground and down the small leafy slope. Defeating the purpose of not wanting to look like a strange idiot, he caught Marissa's attention again, making her look over at him with curiosity. She rushed over to him, smiling. Embarrassed, Taryn got to his knees like a frazzled old woman who had just dropped a basket of fruit. He began to quickly pick up some of the sprigs of rosemary that spilled from his satchel, blowing the dirt from each one. "What are you doing, Taryn?" Marissa giggled, kneeling down to help him pick up the herbs. She softly placed her bouquet down, trying not to scatter her flowers. I was just picking some herbs for my mother. What is a royal princess like yourself doing in the forest alone?" he asked, shyly catching a glimpse of her sparkling blue eyes. "And what is a boy like yourself doing spying on a princess like myself?" she teased, smiling at him. "I've come looking for your companionship." They simultaneously went to pick up the last sprig, her hand touching the spiny rosemary first, and his hand on hers. She could feel the roughness of his hand as he felt the elegance of hers. They were quiet, looking into each other's eyes. After what seemed like eternity, Taryn quickly pulled his hand away. They both stood up, dusting the gritty earth off themselves. Taryn cleared his throat nervously. "Forgive me, I was just captivated by your beautiful voice," he said, swallowing down his nervousness, glancing away from her tender blue eyes for a second. "You have my ears under some kind of spell." After an intense moment, Taryn noticed her bouquet still lying on the ground. He picked it up, giving it back to her. She smiled at him again, accepting it from him as if he had picked it for himself. She brought the rosemary up to her nose, smelling it and admiring the small, dusty blue-colored blossoms. It carried the strong aroma of spicy sweet evergreen, lemons and eucalyptus, tangy and sweet, warm and spicy, like the smells of love. "Lovely," she said, looking back into his eyes. The luscious herb and blooms looked charming near her crystal blue eyes. "Rosemary, an herb of love," she said, caressing the tip of the sprig on his cheek. She giggled, then took his hand softly and placed the stem in his palm. "Now you must be faithful to me," she teased, smiling her beautiful smile again. "Legend has it that any person who is touched by a flowering sprig of rosemary by another is to be faithful to them," she smiled brightly, giggling. "Should the touch of rosemary bind me to my lady?" he asked, smiling. His young heart pounded in his chest. "If one wishes it," she teased again. Taryn came closer to her, wanting to kiss her then. He wanted to tell her how he felt about her. He wanted to show her how much he cared for her. His young body wanted to kiss her like lovers did. They stood so close to each other, looking into each other's eyes. She didn't move, seeming to wait for that kiss, for something to happen. He didn't kiss her, though, for the fear of rejection and anxiety of him being a common boy germinated inside of him. Instead, he held up the rosemary to her, giving her back the flowering herb. "Add this to your bouquet, for I will always be faithful to you," he said, smiling, caught up in the innocent moment. She gave him a warm smile, taking the rosemary from him and adding it amongst her wild flowers. She turned away from him, beginning to sing again. He walked with her through the beautiful forest, listening to her enchanting voice. She stopped singing, staring off as if in a deep thought. Breezes came and went, playing with her long hair. "Does your suitors have to do those impossible things in which you sing of to have your love?" Taryn asked, looking towards the ground, then at her. Marissa came out of her daydream. "Must he make you a golden crown made of fine feathers or find a castle of lace?" He smiled, teasing her of the song she always sung. "Am I not sweet enough for such a challenge?" she asked, teasing back. Her eyes gazed into his, mesmerizing him like deep, clear spring water. "Oh yes, you are, princess," he said, blushing. "You are sweeter than nectar, and one would be lucky to win such a sweet love." They stood before each other, staring into one another's eyes again. She brought her lips close to his ear, nearly touching his skin. "Then sprinkle the halls with sprigs of heather," she whispered, reciting the last line of the song. She smiled again, then ran off through the forest, giggling. Playfully, he ran after her, just smiling, blushing the whole time with a rapidly beating heart. Taryn came out of his daydream as he walked out of the forest and into the great field of Minselthwaite. The long way in which he went seemed to be quick, and he was lost in thought. He smiled at his daydream, wishing that he could just have relived it. He wished they were still in the forest province together. But at the same time, he regretted not telling Marissa of his feelings for her that day. He wished he would have told her then how he felt. He began to hum the song that he remembered Marissa singing as he continued through the field.